Okay, I'm so happy and honored to be with two of my favorite people in the Director for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, Mary Antoinette Smith. She's an interim director now, but she was my director for many, many years. And we did a lot of wonderful things together here at Seattle University. And we bring to you Menah Pratt today from Virginia Tech. And there's so many surprises. We've had another event this morning, so some of the questions that may be elicited after the presentation are probably from the talk this morning as well. So let's hope that we fill you in with all the wonders of this book. It's actually two books. Companion, which is amazing for someone in women, gender, and sexuality studies. It's a companion journal to Black Wild Girl, and you can buy incredible products at blackwildgirl.com. I'm not going to introduce Menah because I really wanted probably my favorite person at Seattle University, Dr. Mary Antoinette Smith, to introduce Menah to you today. I will be interviewing her, and I'm Dr. Gabriella Gutiérrez Muhs. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to stand in front of the camera. No narcissism here, just well, maybe just a little. Hello, everyone. It is my honor and pleasure in my role as Interim Director for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies this quarter to welcome you all to our afternoon event with Dr. Menah Pratt, who we're all so excited to have on our campus today. Over the past several weeks, Dr. Gutiérrez Muhs has worked tirelessly, as is her wont, to ensure that this visit with us would be a wonderful experience for us all. And I know Dr. Pratt has arrived on our campus with exquisite excitement on her end. In evidence of this, I'll quote her ex, formerly known as Twitter, post from 2 days ago, wherein she wrote, "So honored to be invited by dear sister scholar Gabriella Gutiérrez Muhs to Seattle University to share Black Wild Girl and power we have as writers and scholars to put our words into the world." And put their words into the world, these two prolific women warriors ubiquitously do. In Dr. Pratt's book, there's an endorsement by the another famous African-American woman, poet, writer, Nikki Giovanni. And I'm going to read this, but I'm going to adapt it to also include my sister scholar colleague, Gabriella. Once upon a time, before time could be counted, soft words were spoken. Then a song was sung, and a seed, hearing those sounds, followed them out to become a part of the newness, to become a part of this warmth, to become a journey into girlhood. Menah Pratt and Gabriella Gutiérrez Muhs follow that sound to that warmth, to that possibility, and invite us to travel with them. How privileged we are to have the opportunity to witness this conversational exchange between them this afternoon. And so with this said, and with eager anticipation, I turn the floor over to these two women word weavers, representing a dyad of brown and black girl wildness and power extraordinaire.
And that's why I chose. Amazing. wordsmith herself.
Oh,
So let's have some fun.
yes.
Where do we begin? This morning you told us about, well, you gave us a lot of tools. It was very moving. There were several professors there that I didn't really, I've known them for 20-something years, but they have never been as vulnerable as they were this morning. And in fact, crying. Because of your book, because of your presence, because of the joy that you bring to us, everywhere you go. And I've known that joy for since Presumed Incompetent was published. That was one of the joys. And I can't believe that the founder of Women of Color in the Academy is here with us in Seattle, at Seattle University. How many members, how many people go? It's thousands of women of color. There's almost no woman of color in the academy that doesn't know about this organization. So what would you say, how many people have you touched?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. It's been 12 years.
Yeah.
And the conference was founded 12 years ago. And this year we had 700 women come. So whatever that math is. But every year, it's that many women that the conference impacts. And we have healing hours as well. So every quarter we do like a healing hour for women of color just to come together virtually to feel empowered. And I would say those get, a couple hundred women each time. So yeah, I never think about it sort of the impact, but yes.
But it's not just women of color. And that's what's important to me, that it's all these other people that are our allies that have been there for us, that get us through tenure and through all these steps in the academy where we would not exist otherwise. So that's important to underline. I was very moved this morning when you talked about how I had no idea that both your father was a physicist and your mother also had a PhD. And can you tell us a little bit about that and how important, now I understand why Presumed Incompetent and other books like that one that came after were so important to you. And it's because you had these parents that were in academia when there were no people of color, no blacks in academia, your parents were there. So that is so amazing to me.
Yeah. I think, I think sometimes you don't recognize as a child who your parents are. Whether they're as educated as mine were or not, they're just like your mom and dad. And they're complicated people. And I don't think, it was until much later, probably when I went to college, that I thought, wow, I think my parents were really unique and different. And because I led a very isolated childhood. Like my father, because of the racism that impacted his career, he didn't believe in friends. It's like there's no such thing as friends. You can't have friends. You can't do sleepovers. You can't go to dances. You can't go to proms. Like, you don't spend time with other people. Like, it's our house and our house is it. And so I think that mindset of just a protective, kind of secretive space made it difficult to understand what other people's lives were like and how people socialized and interacted and what that world was. And so for me, going to college, it was like, oh, there's a lot of different people in the world that live and, have different backgrounds. And I remember calling my brother in college, and I wanted to complain about my parents. It's like, they were really mean, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, look, Menah, a lot of people had effed up parents. And that was just kind of his point of get over it. Whatever hurt, trauma, pain, we were not unique. A lot of people have a lot of trauma in their lives. We had ours, and move on. And in many ways, I feel like he has tried to move on in his own way. He ended up leaving home early and kind of running away in a way from home. And like, I'm not going back. But I think in his own mind, he was like, I'm going to forge my way, and that's how it is. But to hear him say, hey, a lot of people had, effed up parents. I mean, he said the word, but
But we don't.
try to be a little, proper, respectable.
Well,
yes.
I knew we had a lot of things in common, but I never went to overnighters either. And my father didn't even want us to go to college. I had scholarships to all these Ivy Leagues. But, he said no, because he also did not trust the government. He was another immigrant, and he could not believe that there was any institution that was going to give his girls a scholarship. Why? Why would the government? And so, no. I had to go out to college out the window, actually. That's how I went. Fortunately, my mother really believed in education, and actually she was looking forward to me going to college so she could go with me. I still remember her looking through all the catalogs to see, oh no, I really like the dorms at Harvard, right? And her really thinking she was going to go with me. So we have some things in common, Menah.
Absolutely.
For different reasons, Going back to the academy, these are questions that I've been, boiling over for many years, and these are questions I've wanted to ask you. I don't know which one to begin with because they're all... So, what do you consider to be your legacy to women as a writer, as a feminist, as a woman of color, and the daughter of an immigrant father? What is your legacy to the Academy?
One of the, thank you for that. I do think about legacy, not so much but what difference did I make while I was here? And am I doing enough while I'm here with whatever gifts and privilege I have to have left some kind of mark? And in writing the book, I dedicate it to two black women writers. And one is Lorraine Hansberry, and she wrote To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. Some of you might have, okay. And the other one is Leonida McLean, and many of you may not have heard of her. She was a black woman journalist who wrote for the Chicago Tribune. And she committed suicide when she was in her 30s. And I saved the obituary and I put it in my journal because it was the same year that I attempted suicide, and I was 16 years old. And so, like, I remembered, like, oh, this black woman felt this amount of trauma in the world, and it resonated with me. So both of those black women died in their 30s. Okay. So this book, I dedicate it to sort of their memory, and I do this symbolic pouring of libation to them. And I talk about Lorraine Hansberry was very active in the civil rights movement. And before she died, she was like, am I revolutionary enough? Have I been enough of a revolutionary? And she's like, I don't know that I have been. And so she said, when I get my health back, I want to go to Mississippi and see what kind of revolutionary I am. Like, going to the heart of the civil rights movement and being part of that was her mindset of how she was going to see if she was revolutionary enough. So that concept of revolutionary. And then Leonida, they interviewed her ex-former husband, and I did some research for this book, and she was married to Clarence Page, who was a well-known journalist as well. And the interviewer said, Leonida, in the obituary, it said that Leonida carried the weight of the city of Chicago on her shoulders. And so I'm going to read a little bit of my reflection on that, of what it means to carry the weight of a city on your shoulders.
Wonderful.
Leonida had married and divorced Clarence Page, another black journalist. In his reflections on Leonida, Clarence said that she was clinically depressed and bipolar. It may be that we label people clinically depressed and bipolar, but it might just be that they are sensitive and human. That the world is too sensitive for them, and they are impacted differentially because they care so deeply. That does not mean something is wrong with them. Rather, something is wrong with the world. In an interview with Clarence, the interviewer noted that Leonida's obituary said that she carried the weight of the city of Chicago upon her shoulders. The interviewer asked Clarence, should she have shrugged? And Clarence responded, I think so. No, I think quickly and angrily. Some of us cannot shrug our shoulders. This is who we are. We come into this world, we care deeply, we have a calling, and we do not shrug our shoulders. We cannot shrug our shoulders. We must not shrug our shoulders. We must, like Lorraine, find out what kind of revolutionary we are. Lorraine left behind a plea and an exhortation for those of us who are young, gifted, and black. She urges us to, quote, write about the world as it is and as you think it ought to be and must be if there is to be a world. And so, Lorraine and Leonida, I will write. I will write about the world as it is and as I think it ought to be and must be. I will not shrug my shoulders. I will carry the weight of black womanness, and you two will be my inspiration. I will write for you and for the years you couldn't write. Through this libation, I call upon your ancestral energy to come to my side to write for and with me, and I will find out what kind of revolutionary I am. No, I will show the world what kind of revolutionary I am.
Wow. So, this is an awkward question, but when you're in a public setting and people are racist, like I know you're a leader and an administrator at your university, and that you are, when they're whatever, classist, racist, and they put their foot in their mouth, as is usually the case. There's always one or two of those. We know that. What do you do? How do you, because I know that you and I and, Mary, and we're all healers. So we're here to let people know, what's going on, but also not to hurt people. We're not here to intentionally hurt people. But the way things are going in this country, I think that we need a lot of interruptions lately. So I know that I talk about these things with my students in class. And what is the best way to work with obviously racist people? I said I would be asking some difficult questions.
Yes. My life has been spent in spaces where I'm often the only one, the only black woman or the only black person, or one of a few, because sometimes you can have others who maybe are not aligned. But then you still feel like maybe you're the only.
That was very diplomatic.
And there was a period of time in my life where I didn't have the words. And I remember in college just being very angry. Like so I majored in English and I minored in philosophy and African American studies. And I started getting this understanding about the experiences of black people in America. And I just became angry. And I was reading James Baldwin, and I just was just like, this anger was just starting to bubble up in terms of just understanding the magnitude of the impact of racism, of like this hatred, and just like this meanness of whiteness on blackness. And one of my journal entries, I wrote a poem, and at the end of the poem, I said, me, an African American in America, I hate it. And I remember not knowing how to interrupt. I didn't have the words. And I specifically kind of made a decision that I wanted to go to college and continue my education to develop the words and the tools to talk about racism, sexism, oppression, and to be able to use my words to impact it. And so when I went to law school and I did the PhD in sociology, it was so awesome because I was getting my words. I was getting my words, I was getting my tools, I was like understanding how systems of oppression work. I was reading Black feminist thought and understanding domains of power. It's like, oh yeah, that was like this domain of power was operating in this way, and how can I leverage this domain or that domain? And so it was like a phenomenal intellectual academic space of thinking about how disciplines work together and how I could create strategies and tools to fight against it. And so in my work, I get to use my knowledge to implement change. And I have found my voice. And many times younger, I would sit in meetings like, and then, I would hear something, it would just like kind of pierce me, like, and I wouldn't say anything because I didn't know what to say or how to say it. But now what I do is I say, I feel some kind of way. I feel some kind of way. Like I actually say those words. I said, what you said makes me feel some kind of way. Because I don't always quite know, like they might have had the meeting before the meeting and they concocted a scenario where they're going to implement their plan. And I wasn't a part of it, so I don't fully know everything, but I know something is amiss in that moment. And so instead of allowing the moment to pass with silence, I just say, I feel some kind of way. And I stopped and I noticed that in meetings, like women would raise their hands, like waiting to be called on, and men never did. And often women would not be called on, and men would just interrupt. They would just say, and the meeting would go on, and maybe the woman never got called on. So like I don't raise my hand. I don't say, often women would say, I'm sorry, but like we say I'm sorry a lot. And I started noticing how often women say I'm sorry in meetings. So I try very hard not to say I'm sorry. And I just interrupt. I feel some kind of way.
You go,
like,
you go.
I feel some kind of way. And that interrupts it might not always change the outcome, but I've called it out. And I have that personal conviction, and I don't have the regret of sitting in a space of injustice and being silent.
Your dissertation, some people might be interested in knowing here, involved issues of social movements. Can you share a bit about your understanding of social movements? How have you used that, and how have those movements evolved since you wrote your dissertation, particularly in our current global context, right? Palestine, right? And your evolution as, an activist, becoming an activist. I'd like to hear, because I know we have one or two activists in the room. I think they'd like to hear about this.
So I did this joint degree program, law and sociology. It was just like this most phenomenal academic intellectual experience. And I needed to find a dissertation that connected those two areas. So something that dealt with law, something that dealt with sociology. And I was blessed to find this legal case in 1992. The Detroit School Board decided to create 3 single-sex schools for black boys. Like, it's like black boys are in crisis. It's just like they're endangered in society, and we need to do something radical to protect them. So there was this national movement of the endangered black boy. And Detroit, an all-black city, essentially, decided, okay, we have the power to do whatever we want, sort of this black nationalistic ideology. And we want to create 3 single-sex schools, K through 6 schools for black boys. We're going to call them the Malcolm X and Paul Robeson and Marcus Garvey schools, right? So the black male, militant. And they're just going to be for black boys. So the American Civil Liberties Union and the National Organization for Women, the Legal Defense Fund, brought a lawsuit and said, hold up. What about the girls? Like, and at that time, you could not create single-sex schools for black boys. The laws changed a little bit, but you couldn't do it at that time. Not based on race, but there was a legal settlement. So the case went, there was arguments, there were all these briefs. The case was brought by a black mother, so you need a plaintiff for the case. A black mother and her daughter, Sean and Crystal Garrett. And because of all of the controversy and death threats that they got, the mother and the daughter, they withdrew from the case. And they were replaced as plaintiffs with a Nancy Doe. Okay. So I'm like, okay, when black women and girls stand up to fight, we're invisibilized. So there was a legal case, and there was a settlement. And the settlement said out of the 560 seats within these 3 schools, 136 were going to be for girls. Okay. 136 seats would be set aside, so that's not even 50%, right? Okay. 136 for girls. And then the community came out and protested and said, do not send your girls. Do not send your girls to the school so we can essentially have what we want. So they did this little social movement. Don't send your girls to the school. And they had signs that said, keep your girls at home. Like they're, marching with their signs. Black women were part of the community with signs that say, keep your girls at home. And only 30 girls enrolled. So I'm like, where are the black girls? That was the name of my dissertation. Like, where are the black girls? Like, what happened? That this social movement undermined a legal opportunity that wasn't even equitable. Okay? So that was my first intellectual foray into trying to understand how do issues of injustice become like manifested, and what motivates sort of normally agnostic, indifferent people to motivate them to engage in social action. So we can think about, okay, the Palestinian Jewish conflict. Okay, October 7th, something happened, and then other things started happening. But when did the encampment start? Recently, right? So months went by, and people were concerned, but people are normally agnostic politically. It's like, this is not great. You have some to the far right, some to the far left. So you have the fars, and then you have the middle. But when the middle shifts, that's when you get the protests. So, and it's based on a sense of moral. Like the morality piece becomes so huge that you can no longer comfortably sit in the midst of a moral injustice. Okay, so the mindset has been, something is happening in Gaza right now that is just so morally wrong. And we have to do something. Yep. Not necessarily that the protests on college campuses directly impact what's happening in Gaza, but we have to speak up and we have to take action. So that's what I looked at. It's like, what does it take to move normally agnostic, non-political, apolitical people to action for social justice movements? And how do we leverage language? Because it's language that makes people move. It's their understanding. So another example, and then the LGBTQ movement. Okay. You couldn't marry who you wanted. Like the law said you can't do that. Okay. And then you started having people who were like, I will quietly do a civil union for you. Like, we won't tell anyone, but I'm gonna help you. And then people started having conversations. It's like, okay, my person is dying. Why shouldn't I be in the room with my person? And that's like a moral issue that everyone could kind of be like, yeah, I get to be in the room when my person is dying. Why does this community not get to be there? And so that sense of morality is usually what moves people to action. So that's why when I talk about, I needed to get the words to be an activist, I needed to get understanding, because you can't just like be an activist if you don't have knowledge.
Where were you during the AIDS crisis?
I was at Vanderbilt. I was in school. The AIDS crisis started in the 80s.
In the 80s.
It was in the 80s.
Throughout the 80s.
Yeah, so in the 80s I was in high school, college. Yeah.
Because I still remember it was something we couldn't really run away from. It was a little bit like COVID, that you were seeing people dying in your town, in your block, you know, continuously, ongoing basis. And I think that's something else that we couldn't just shut our eyes to as you know, communities, and especially communities of color, because we had a lot more people dying, right? I just wondered where you were. Yeah, because in San Francisco and the whole Bay Area, it was, we were all in mourning, right? So I wanted to know, how has academia changed because of your work?
I don't know that academia's changed because of my work.
Oh, I think so. A little bit here and there.
Maybe. I mean, in my work, in my scholarship, I try to be sensitive to the voices of those who've been marginalized and disenfranchised because of their identity. I've tried to, and when I first got to Virginia Tech, the president said to me, do you use Twitter? I was like, no, social media, bad, you know. I mean, I remember when I have two children now in their 20s, and they first started using Facebook. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not good. What's going on? So then I told them they couldn't use Facebook, and they said everybody in my class is on it. And, like, we collaborate on Facebook, and it's like, okay, just be careful of those child predators out there. I mean, because that was like what the, you know, what was being said.
It's partially true,
Right.
you know,
Right.
partially true for
Right.
children of color. I mean, I had at least one of my sons, you know, that they tried to get him to befriend him, and they were people from the border. I'm pretty sure it was Narcos. So, yeah.
Yeah,
You were
so
not
there
wrong,
is-
you were
right,
not wrong.
Right, okay. So, so they got on Facebook, and I get to the university, do you use Twitter? No. It's like, I think that would be good for you to think
The
about.
president.
Yes, because he was on Twitter. Like, a lot of people were on Twitter. I mean, this was, I mean, maybe 8 years ago. It was just a very sort of popular, intellectual, kind of academic platform. And so I got on Twitter. But I also, to your question, so I'm trying to get to your question. So in 2016, I got to Virginia Tech, I got on Twitter, and then in 2019, I published a book on my mother's life. And it was called A Black Woman's Journey from Cotton Picking to College Professor, Lessons about Race, Class, and Gender in America. And it was her journey literally from picking cotton as a young girl in rural Texas to becoming a college professor. And all the challenges of race, class, and gender that from 1930s and the Great Depression to 2012 that she had experienced. And so I started understanding that social media, and now I think it's sort of LinkedIn, Instagram, Threads-ish, I don't know. Someone told me a new one that I had never heard of recently. I do think social media is an important platform for building community, for sharing ideas, for educating about injustice, for understanding the global perspective. And so when Black Wild Girl came out, a friend said, "Are you on TikTok?" I was like, "No, I cannot do not one more, not one more." Like, oh no, TikTok is really important. There's like book talk, and people get knowledge about books through TikTok. And you can do longer videos than Instagram. I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And so she said, "I'll do it for you." So she started my TikTok account. So it's not quite like aggressively being used, but I do think that when we think about impact and how we can have impact, I mean, I started writing blog posts when the first book came out, just sort of reflecting on why do I write? Why have I written this book about my mother? What am I thinking about? And then COVID happened, and I'm like, what's happening with COVID? And why are we teaching kids about, you know, math and social science when maybe we should do a whole new curriculum? Like, what matters right now? Is this what matters right now? And the confusion around what are parents being told and how like we're trying to still navigate a world when children are being homeschooled by their parents, and we're still expecting parents to show up for work. I mean, it was just all the disconnects in the world. And so I think our writing, media, strategically, because it's time consuming and it can drain you. But I think those are ways that our words can impact the world.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have a few more questions.
Okay.
But I just wanted to welcome Natasha Martin, and it's thanks to her that we are here. And I had a wonderful breakfast this morning, so thank you. I wanted to ask you, well, I'll have two most important questions, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the people. Because I was very much impacted this morning about how people were so affected about your stories, about your father and your mother growing up. So what are the parallels you see between you as a mother and you as a parent academic, and being the daughter of two academics, one of them an immigrant and the other a woman of color with a PhD, in a country that does not fully respect educated people of color?
Yeah, I mean, my parents, oddly, in some ways, because my father had decided, which I shared this morning, that because of the racism that impacted his career, he was a nuclear physics professor. And 3 years into his tenure journey, his contract was terminated. And so he was essentially unemployed, and then they decided they would buy apartment buildings, and so we were the maintenance workers of the apartment buildings. And he decided that my brother and I would play tennis and do piano and violin to be independent of the system. And so he didn't really emphasize education. And he almost wanted me to forego college to pursue this tennis career. And one of the scenes in the book, I just share this memory. It was interesting writing the book because you have the journals. So I've journaled for 45 years, so the book is largely based on these journals. But then you have present day memories of the past event. All right, so do you use the journal entry, or do you use your present day reflection, or do you do both? And so I remember the day I quit tennis. And I wrote about it a little bit in my journal, but like my memory's so strong that I almost went from my memory. And I think I'll share it a little bit, yes, because it was an interesting sort of moment in my life, and it did change my life. Our lives have turning points. And February 3rd, 1985 was a transformational day in my life. It was the day I buried my tennis career. So I graduated from high school at 16, and for 2 years I played tennis with my father as my coach. Got up at 4:30 every morning, played 6 to 8 hours a day, wrote about tennis. When we were taped video, we had videos, so I had to watch matches of myself, playing tennis, watch matches of people playing tennis, and like take notes. So like my days were consumed, like 10 to 12 hours of just tennis for 2 years. So this was the second year. So I graduated from high school when I was 16, and I was 17, not yet 18, but for 2 years I was doing this tennis thing. It was the day I buried my tennis career. I so vividly as an adult remember this moment. It was about 6:00 p.m. I was waiting for the dishwasher to finish so I could unload the dishes, which was one of my many household chores. I decided to go downstairs and fix my tennis shoes. I rarely got new shoes, and those were for matches, so I had to constantly fix and repair the holes in my practice shoes with glue. That day, for some unknown reason, Mama came downstairs to watch the TV show 60 Minutes. She rarely watched TV, and especially not downstairs, so I think she wanted to be near me. After I finished my shoes, I remember Mama suggested I stay and watch 60 Minutes with her. We sat on the small green couch together in the dark basement. It was a rare moment for us to be together. After a few moments, I noticed Papa standing at the top of the stairs, and I remember feeling my heart skip a beat. Suddenly he called my name, Menah! I always felt like he shouted my name. I got up from the couch, as I always did, and said, "Yes, Papa," and started running up the stairs. I only reached halfway before he angrily shouted, "What are you doing?" "Watching 60 Minutes with Mama," I said. "You have other things to do besides watch TV." I heard and felt my mom getting up from the couch, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw her moving toward the staircase. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, she said to my father, "What exactly does she need to do? Why can't she watch TV?" Her questioning enraged him and shocked me. He said she needs to get ready for tennis tomorrow. To my absolute surprise, Mama calmly said, "She may not want to play tennis. And there are other things to do besides play tennis. Ask her." I was still standing in the middle of the green indoor-outdoor carpeted staircase, in between my mother at the bottom of the staircase and my father at the top. I didn't know which way to look or who to look at. It was almost an out-of-body experience. I was paralyzed, standing on the staircase, sandwiched between my parents, but felt that something important and life-changing was about to happen. Papa, in a harsh voice that almost assumed the answer, asked me if I wanted to keep playing tennis. I paused a long time. I knew the answer, but I was afraid to say it. In the long silence, I was trying to gather my courage to speak truth to power. During my silence, my mother moved up a few steps on the staircase closer to me and quietly said, "Tell the truth. What do you want?" I remember rarely hearing my mother's voice as a child. My father's was so dominant. But I heard her voice that day, and from the middle of the stairs, in between my parents, I said, "I want to go to college." And that was a turning point. And like that was the last time I played tennis.
Wow.
And I ended up getting a job at McDonald's. And that was like my first job. It was McDonald's and Arby's. I hated Arby's. I really hated working there. You had to like shout back the order. So I was like, "1 roast beef, please." And I always just felt like so humiliated shouting back orders. But I was like the biscuit maker at McDonald's. And I came home one day and my father said, "You're not allowed to come in the house. You've quit tennis and this house is no longer yours. So you'll have to wait outside until your mother comes home." So I remember sitting on the steps in my little brown McDonald's uniform waiting for my mother to come home. And she came home and she said, "What are you doing out here?" I said, "Papa said I can't come inside the house." And I go, "Yeah, no, you're going to come in." And I came in and my father said, "Well, she's no longer welcome here." And so my parents decided that they were going to get a divorce. So we packed up our stuff. My mom found an apartment 3 blocks away. We moved all our little things, and 3 days later we moved back. With the same movers. I'm so horrified. Because as a kid, these things like horrify you. And but the change was my mother gained control of her money.
Yes.
So she was the one that was working, and she gave her check to my father every month. And so as part of that settlement, she got to keep half of her paycheck. And that's what she used to pay for my college my first year. And that agreement was that I could go to college and he couldn't interrupt my college. So that was like a big turning point in my life, is that she, like, if she hadn't said, say what you want, I might not have said that. And so I think I knew.
So she knew when to interrupt.
She knew when to interrupt.
Wow.
She knew when to interrupt.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
How many young women, trans, LGBT people don't get any support.
Yes.
Any support for doing what they want to do, what they need to do.
Yeah.
I had a brown uniform too.
McDonald's.
I knew we had something in common. I love that uniform. It's a horrible little polyester. You had to take care of it, otherwise you had to pay for it out of your own money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I knew we had more than, a few things in common. I wanted to ask you how, if you had, this pie in the sky and you had the ability, I know you've already, although you're very modest, you're very humble, but I know you've already changed academia, and I know you've created possibilities for young Black people, but also others. You've set some precedents. And I knew this before I knew you were a lawyer, but you have set some precedents. But if you could, how would you change academia? Because I often feel like we haven't really allowed students in college to experience the world out there, right? That they graduate and they don't really know what they're going to, and then they're shocked. What is their degree going to do? But how would you change, if you could do anything, how would you change academia?
I think two things.
I'm taking notes.
I feel like we need to rethink the curriculum. I don't quite know how, but I think we're not quite understanding that students, it's a different generation of students. They learn differently, they think differently, they want things differently. And we have these general education curriculums from the 1960s that, and I mean, there's some benefit to exposing, because you don't know what you're going to come into. You think, oh, I just want to do this, and it's like, oh, wait, there's some other things over here. So there's some benefit to that. But I don't know that we've really created this, like, a marvelous space for exploration and creativity. Like, this 130 hours and 60 hours has to be in a major. Why? Why? So it's like training for the workforce, but not training for curiosity and just exploration of who you are and what you're thinking in the world. I think that's one thing. This disciplinary focus, and then as you progress, it gets progressively more narrow to like a little dissertation on some esoteric idea. This space of exploration, but also, yes, I think it's nice to become an expert in an area. I think there's like a really wonderful thing about really knowing and mastering content. But I don't know that we've got the university structured well to do that. I also think there's just deep benefit in exploring the world. Because some university settings become little marvelous bubbles of idyllic. I mean, you like to walk around this campus and it's like this beautiful
Garden. This beautiful garden.
Yes.
Space, yes.
but it's unreal. Right?
Yes.
I mean, you don't see
It's a bubble.
homelessness, you don't see, violence, you don't see how poverty's staring you in the face.
Absolutely.
You don't see hunger. And 90% of the world is suffering. And then we're sort of part of this privileged elite in a way that we live in these nice-ish residence halls, and we can explore our minds and the world. And I worry that it's like too ideal and protected and not real. And the world is like rough and real. And I feel like if more students understood the urgency of what's happening in the world, not just through oh, look at that, that's rough. But go in the world and see that. Go to, Senegal and see hundreds and thousands of water bottles on the coast, to see the sewer just going into the ocean, to see homelessness and amputees in countries where there's life set, and to like an urgency that just sitting and reflecting intellectually doesn't always do.
But also valuing, Menah, the students that we now have. We had a couple of them at the breakfast this morning that do come from Senegal, that are immigrants, that come from dire poverty, that walked 30 days to get into the United States, that walked through, from Guatemala, and they were babies sometimes. And valuing that those students need to get credit for what they already know about the world. We don't have a setup for that, right? But this leads right into my last question, and then we'll let everybody else ask questions. I think that it would be a mistake to not ask you about this last year, where you've gone all over the world and have seen incredible, I know my son was very jealous of you in North Africa, where you've gotten to go, and what you've seen and the research that you've done on women's lives. And I wanted you to just to end with that, to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about that and how necessary that is also for faculty to do these things that sometimes are outside of our comfort zone.
Yes. So I had the privilege of having an American Council on Education fellowship this year. And the fellowship is usually a space where you shadow a leader and think about leadership differently. But I wanted to think about education differently. And so have used the fellowship to travel to Ethiopia, Benin, Senegal, South Africa, and India in the last 6 months, and try to understand the experiences of women and girls in education. And I want to say it's rough out there. There are women studying in conditions that barely seem feasible for education. There are, I wasn't prepared to understand, for example, in Senegal, the impact of politics on, the same way that we're navigating different political realities around DEI here, they're navigating political realities that impact whether their school can open or not. In India, their political dynamic is affecting what they're taught in classrooms and what curriculum can be used. And, in South Africa, there'll be 600,000 applications for a spot of 600, because there are that many folks who are trying and want to get an education. There's legacies, historical legacies of caste that still impact educational opportunities in India. In South Africa, there's, the impact of the legacy of apartheid that's still impacting opportunity. In America, there's still a legacy of, enslavement and the treatment of Native Americans that still impact opportunity. And so, they're just like images that have stuck with me. And I think about how, in predominantly white institutions in particular, people, and especially at larger land-grant universities or regional schools, you're drawing from a same pool, from high schools, similar high schools. And it can be very easy to replicate what I call the high school alumni experience. So you go to college and you connect with your high school friends. And whether it's in a fraternity or sorority or the clubs, it's what's familiar. So and we come in and we're freshmen and we want to find a friend quickly. And it's easier to find these friends, and people room with someone they knew from high school sometimes. And so I worry that in some ways we're just replicating our high school connections in college. And we're not stepping outside the boundaries. And then if a university is not diverse racially and in other ways, students can go through 4 years and be no more transformed and not have expanded their networks awareness if they haven't studied abroad, or if they go abroad and they go to Europe or they go to Australia, you have a very different experience than if you go to, Central America, South America, or Africa. And then you just replicate a certain world.
Absolutely. Hang out with your same
yes.
group type of people.
Yes. And so, I don't have answers, but I have, ways now and words that are going to continue to influence the way I think about the academy and how our system can be structured to really transform like amazing young people's lives.
Now, aside from activists, I'm sorry, another question. I also have several people that I know will be great writers in this room. And I wanted to not miss the opportunity to ask you, what is your advice for young writers?
My advice to young writers is to write. I use this example a lot when I reflect, because my son's a painter. And he studied painting in school. And I was like, Emmanuel, his name's Emmanuel. Emmanuel, what do you want to do? He was a young kid. He's like, I want to paint murals around the world. I'm like, okay, get at it. I'm going to get to it. And if I tell him, you want to be a painter, you're a painter. So every day you have to paint. But that's what you have to do, whether you feel like it or not. My grandmother on my mother's side only had a 6th grade education. But somehow she read poetry. And like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poetry.
Yes.
And she sent me a letter with a Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poem. I thought the poem was her poem. It wasn't until I was grown. I was reciting the poem, and I'm like, my grandmother wrote that poem. I'm like, no, that's like a Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote that. I'm like, no, she wrote it.
I had a similar experience.
She wrote it. It was a letter from her to me. My parents made me memorize the poem. And I'm just going to end on sharing the poem because it speaks to this writing, how to be a writer. The poem says, the heights that great men, but I always add in women, the heights that great men and women reached and kept were not obtained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards through the night. So if you're going to write, you're writing through the night. If you're going to paint, you're going to paint. Like whatever your gift is, whatever your calling is, you just got to do it a lot. And you get better by doing it.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful, thundering questions from you that you have been meaning to ask.
Okay, well, I have a question because I was blessed to be present for your morning talk. And speaking of people who want to write, I love the idea that you had of having this companion journal. And if you could talk a little bit about that and the idea behind it and what you hope your readers will get out of having that journal.
Yeah, so I didn't want, the book is very personal. So it's based on 45 years of journals. And, as I shared this morning, when I was writing the journals, I wasn't thinking that I was going to share it with the world. I was like, I just need to get this out of my head and out of my heart and onto a page. And I wanted it to be, I wanted in the sharing of my personal life, I wanted to be helpful to others. And I thought, okay, how can I do that? And so this idea just came to me that in the end of each section of the book, I would have these reflection questions. It's like, okay, my life was this way, but what about you and your life? Like, what are you doing in your life? Or what was your first memory as a child? What was your relationship with your parents like? What is it like? How did you handle the death of somebody close to you? What has your spiritual journey been like? I mean, just like basic being human questions. And so at first I just had the questions at the end of each stage. So the book has 12 stages and a prologue and epilogue, and so there's questions. And then I thought, well, how do they answer these questions? Like, are they just going to answer them in their head? And I thought, well, maybe it would be nice to have this journal where as they're reading, they could, and I did an audiobook as well. So
Oh, that was the secret to me.
I did do the audiobook. I recorded it myself.
Nice.
Okay.
So I thought, well, if they listen to the audiobook or they read the book and they want to undertake their own journey, then they can journal along in the journal. So the journal and the book provide just an opportunity to be liberatedly courageous. Because I think there's so much we think about and that we know that we're scared to sort of write down, and questions that we should struggle with that might not have answers, but we should wrestle with. It's like, okay, what's our understanding of God? I mean, I remember as a little girl, it's like where is he? Like, you know, I mean, I didn't go to church regularly and I couldn't quite grasp like there was a God out there somewhere that could see and help me that I couldn't see myself, and like just like things that we can question maybe in our own writing that we're afraid to speak. But maybe after we write it, we might become courageous enough to speak about it. So that's why the idea came. Like, I think that if I'm going to first have the questions, then maybe I can create a space and place for people to write. And maybe people can start their own Black Wild Girl journey.
Yeah, I love it. Thank
And
you.
there's also a website where you can buy incredible sweatshirts. I love them. What is it?
blackwildgirl.com.
That's right. So get your presents there. But I think some of the questions are really sophisticated, and I really congratulate you for that. What does metamorphosis mean to you? Right? Have there been moments in your life when you have experienced what felt like metamorphosis? So I love that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing
Oh,
your
thank you
story.
for
I wish
coming.
I was able to make breakfast this morning. It sounds amazing. I am curious to know if you can share a little bit about your healing journey in the process of writing this, and knowing that you took 45 years of
Yes.
information, right? That the compiling
Yes.
of this book, I imagine, evoked so many
Yes.
different emotions, memories,
Yes.
things to process that maybe you had locked away
Yes.
somewhere. And so, I would just love to know the healing journey,
Yes.
just as somebody who is actually working on a project just like this. So, thank you.
Yes. No, it was traumatic and healing at the same. I mean, because my life has had a lot of trauma, but I think many of our lives have traumatic moments that we just sort of try to plow through. And I had to find ways of summoning the courage to, one, just write about it and understand that it was going to be out there, but also to grieve some things. And I wrote about my mother's death. I mean, both my parents have passed. My father's death, it didn't impact me. My mother's death was just like, oh my gosh, like where'd she go? You know, it was very painful. I got divorced. Was married 28 years. Got divorced after COVID. And I'm like, I didn't write about it initially. And I had amazing editors. It's like, oh, something's missing. Like every time you talk about this person in your life, it's very surface. And there's no depth. And you should go back, as editors gently do, and add a little more depth. Like, why did you marry him? What did you like about him? Why did you fall in love? And I didn't talk about the divorce. But I think the book was unfinished. And so, because the book was written in 2019, 2020, COVID happened, and everybody comes and lives together, and it's like, dude, I can't live. Whoa, you know, you're crazy. I mean, I think COVID did make some people crazy, it really did. And then, but I'm going to share a little bit about the healing.
Great.
So we all quarantined together. And he created this very odd Bible study that he orchestrated that we were required to participate in as a family. It's just me, my daughter, husband, and my son. But he's like, every morning we're getting up and we're doing Bible study. I'm like, dude, what's up with this, right? So it was funny because my daughter and I would be on our phone. Is he crazy? I can laugh about it now, but it really wasn't funny at the moment. All right, so I'm going to read this very short section about healing. Okay. I started looking for a counselor, quickly finding an incredible, powerful, sweet, compassionate, intelligent black woman who agreed to provide marriage counseling to us. At various seasons of our marriage, we had gone to counseling. All the experiences followed a similar pattern. We would start together, I would continue, he would stop. The pattern inevitably continued in Blacksburg. We started, he stopped, and I continued. I continued because counseling got me out of the house every week. Counseling gave me someone to talk to who affirmed me. Counseling made me know I wasn't crazy. And counseling made me know I was valued and cherished. Every week, my amazing counselor reminded me that I was powerful, amazing, intelligent, compassionate, and caring. She said I was a deeply rooted tree that blossoms and blooms with fruit that nourishes others. She saw me standing tall and strong. She told me that there would be reaping and harvesting of the many sorrow seeds that had been sown, producing joy and peace in the world. My counselor reminded me that I had all the tools for my initiation journey and I didn't need to revert back to the generational trauma of my childhood and allow my sacred and powerful spirit, the now emerging bloom, to be severed or dismembered. Obadiah, my husband, ex-husband, was attempting to put Black Wild Girl, my newly liberated and empowered spirit, back into the backpack. I couldn't let him. I was a tree. And I reminded myself in my journal entries in the fall of 2020, be the tree, Menah, be the tree. And I think that sense of liberation, of reminding myself, okay, who am I? Counseling. I mean, I've gone to counseling most of my life. And I think and different counselors I've learned serve different purposes. Like, okay, this counselor is good for this moment in time, and then you outgrow that counselor. And some counselors are they need counseling too, right? I mean, and they become counselors because they want to help people, but sometimes they're not quite ready to deal with some of the stuff, right? So for me, the healing, I mean, this book was very, the memories that I could draw from a memory, that still stamped, almost imprinted. And so very healing, and to feel also I had learned lessons. So at the end of each stage is goddess wisdom. And that's the lesson I learned, or the takeaway from it. And so then it wasn't just trauma, but it was a lesson. It was an experience that led to wisdom that I could share with others. And so I think, I remember once at the conference this year, the Faculty Women of Color, this woman was talking about autoethnographies. I was like, oh, okay, there's a lot of autoethnographies where people are telling their story as scholarship. She said there's a journey to autoethnography. She said, your experience, the first time you have some traumatic experience, you have the ugly cry, like, ooh, right? Then you might call your friend and tell your friend about the experience, but you're still upset, but you kind of can talk about it. Okay, then you might be able to write about it. And then at some point you can academically talk about it without crying. And she said, when you're able to talk about your experience without crying, then you know you've almost healed from it. And so when I first started talking, I mean, there would be times like I'd read a section and my voice would still be a little shaky because it was still so emotional. And I feel like even just still talking about my life is still healing in a way. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Couple more.
But so often we're just, it's just wrong. Like, it's just wrong. Well, that's not a helpful approach to dismantling a system and structure of oppression. It's not easy to do that, right? And so if we don't really fully understand it, we can't dismantle it. And sometimes, yes, you can use the master's tools, but sometimes you need to use the enslaved mindset, okay, or the mindset of those who were enslaved. So it's a little bit of that strategic thinking, but we should be in those spaces. And our mindset and our ways of looking at the world will change those fields because we're there, you know, and you're there, and the way you think and see the world is different from those who created that field. But you have to understand it first. I mean, that's what I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Yes. Elias.
Hi. So you were speaking earlier about how going to university really helped you develop the tools to impact systems of power. And I was actually I'm just thinking about what I want to do in grad school, and I've been thinking about maybe going into law, and I was just curious, what has studying and practicing law done for you in that respect?
Well, first of all, law school was like so exciting. They don't teach law school the way it was when I went through. But my first year of law school, I had 7 classes. And it was in the first semester. So it was contracts 1, property 1, torts 1, criminal law 1, constitutional law 1. Okay, 2 others. And then the spring semester was property 2. But at the end of the first year, I felt like a little mini lawyer, right? Like I had been exposed to like the main areas of legal thinking. And the main lesson that I learned from just studying law was I thought things were black and white, you know? And it taught me that life is all gray. It's all gray. And that when I talk about like tools and thinking and challenging things, it's like you fight to nuance the gray. So you can like leverage grays in the world to engage in activism. To like push, like these universities are saying, we're enacting policy, blah, 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 to not have the encampment be on our land. Well, let's understand what the policy is. And is that policy, how do we sort of move around and nuance the understanding or interpretation of that policy? And so that was law school. Okay, but I want to distinguish between law school and the practice of law. So I did law school and I was like, oh my gosh, this is just so the most interesting intellectual space, and I'm understanding the grays and I'm understanding all these nuances. And then I did a clerkship. So I worked for a federal judge for a year, which was also wonderful and amazing. And it was an appellate level clerkship. So cases have been decided, it was at the federal level. So cases were decided on a lower level and then they were appealed. And then my judge is hearing, and we're in the courtroom where people are arguing both sides of a matter. And then the judge would say, okay, we've convened as judges and we think the decision should be X. And you, clerk, go right up how we get to X. Right? So then I realized that things weren't as simple as I thought. So when the Supreme Court says, okay, we're going to not have affirmative action, it's like a whole complicated thing, right? It's not a simple, okay, no more use of race. It's like all nuanced. But I didn't really like practicing law. I became a real estate, commercial lending, public finance lawyer for 3 years. And I realized law school had taught me nothing to be that type of lawyer. But I had to be mentored. So I did have some amazing mentors who just taught me how to be a lawyer. It's very different than going to law school. But when I started practicing doing affirmative action and equal employment opportunity law and ADA law, and I realized that the law could help, hopefully, people who had been mistreated, right? It was employment discrimination law. But it was really hard. Like, there would be situations where people would come to me and say, I've been treated this badly. And I knew they had been mistreated, and there was just nothing I could do. Right? It's like, well, your mistreatment wasn't enough, or you don't have enough data, or you haven't documented, you know, or you would need to be called the N-word 20 times, and like 2 times, it's not really enough, I'm sorry. I mean, so it's just like the magnitude of what the law requires to actually enact justice. I mean, not that it's never going to, but I think it's challenging.
It's frustrating.
It's challenging.
Any other questions?
I don't have a question, I just have an observation.
Yes.
You're pretty incredible, as I know from Gabriella, and I've just been sitting here listening to you. You know, I'm an elder in the academy at this point. I'm very secure in my job, right? But I've been a Victorianist all my life, and I kind of hid in Victorianism, you know, kind of the demure aspect of that. And I'm currently writing an article about Wuthering Heights and Heathcliff, who actually is a character of color in the novel. And people have finally figured out he's black, even though they didn't realize it. And I've always known. Bell Hooks, she mentioned that in an article with Maya Angelou.
Yeah.
That, so anyway, he's just very relatable. So anyway, I'm writing this paper. Kathy's famous line is, I am Heathcliff. So my article is called, I am and am not Heathcliff. And I didn't know that word
Autoethnography.
Because I call mine an ethno-academic narrative, right? From my and my Afrocentric relatabilities with Heathcliff, this Byronic hero. But you've just given me some language and some thoughts, and there's the Ray Hansberry quote that you read. I want to use that so in my article, because what she was saying about, she felt that she wasn't radical enough. So I've been in the academy all these years. I've been hiding in Victorian, 18th and 19th century Brit Lit, and I'm finally writing this article, and I've read parts of it to a couple of people, and they said, oh my God, Mary, because Victorian studies, we're trying to undiscipline the discipline, as they say. And I'm doing something very undisciplined for myself, because what I call it, my ethno-academic piece is part narrative, it's part academic autobiography, black memoir, scholarly narrative, so it's a hybridic piece. But I'm talking about the fact that I have not been radical enough in my discipline throughout my career, but I'm grateful for the fact that we're trying to undiscipline ourselves at this moment in academic history.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to accept it for publication. That's going to be the proving point, because it's one thing in theory to say we invite submissions from historically underrepresented scholars. So I'm trying to make the moment of this opportunity. So either they mean it or they don't. But I finally decided to play full out and say what I want to say because I don't want to not say it. I don't want to finish out my career and not say it. And so probably about, I don't know, I'm going to say about 2 years ago, I would have sat here in this room and had adulation for you. But that's not what I have from this vantage point right now. I just feel really affirmed by you. And synergistically, I think that's important for scholars of color, for
Yes.
black women scholars, black and brown women scholars, and black women and black and brown women in the world, right? That we don't sit in adulation of each other because you're there and you're saying it. You have the confidence to say it before I've said it. But I can say it now. And so I feel affirmed by you. And so it's in no way is that a lowering of you. I just feel affirmed. And today you've given me the confidence to go back and the paper and do the 31st. And it's still emerging because I'm kind of afraid to say really what I want to say. But I read it to one of my new colleagues. She's Korean, and she's our new 19th century Victorianist. She's my peer in the department. And she cried, she wept as I read it.
She's an amazing scholar.
And she said,
Amazing
thank
person.
you so much for paving the way. But I didn't think of myself as paving the way. I was just clawing my way through.
Because what you're contributing to the discipline is revolutionary. It's a revolutionary way of thinking, and this book started out as an academic book. So there was a whole academic piece in front of it, where it was theory and method. And then the book was the praxis of my new theoretical methodological framework. So I had a whole academic intellectual framework of how black womanist writing should happen and how you blend and pull from different disciplines to make that happen. So it was theory, it was method, and then this book was the praxis of doing that. And I couldn't find a press for it. So then someone said, take out the academic. So I took out the academic and I made it a journal article. And then I just started to work with this. So it was revised. And I said, okay, they said, try to find an agent. Revise, query, send it, rejections. So I had 70 rejections for this book.
Wow.
Academic presses, agents, non-traditional presses. So She Writes Press is a woman, feminist, woman-owned press. It's a hybrid press. And when I first sent it to them, they rejected it. And they said, okay, work with this editor. And it was an amazing white woman editor. And I wasn't sure that she was going to get this black wild girl. And she said they shouldn't have rejected it. But we will work together and revise it in a way, because then my word will be enough for them to say, okay. Okay. But she said, we'll work together. So when we're pushing boundaries, I mean, even my first book on my dissertation, it was transdisciplinary, it was law and sociology combined. It was a new theory about how social action happens in the world. And I couldn't find a press until one woman was like, okay, I'm now a woman of color. I'm now the editor of this particular press and this series. And so send it in while I'm the editor. And so I just think it's like not easy to get stuff printed, but to get our word and our scholarship and our way of thinking out into the world. And we have to like push, I mean, and just be like relentless, because those ideas will transform the academy, right? Talk about how do we change disciplines and mindsets. It's that type of scholarship that's like, yo, what's up? I mean, and why can't we say, yo, what's up in scholarship? But, you know, we're not supposed to speak that way in our writing. But we should be like, yo, what's up? Like, we should be able to add vernacular and different ways of speaking and writing into the academy. So I commend you.
Well, I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay.
I've submitted it 5 different times.
Yes.
In different variations.
Yes.
And I was so glad that I held out for this particular opportunity. So
Yeah.
my fingers are crossed
Yeah,
that
yeah,
this is the one. But it's difficult. It's really difficult, as you say, to press those boundaries. And they always kill the messenger.
Yes.
And also we're creating language, we're creating neologisms, we're creating new words, new language for others.
Well,
to
Gabriella,
use it.
you've been my role model,
Oh.
because Gabriella, she, when I made my submission for presumed incompetent, so I wrote my little lightweight, kind of Victorian, it was called No More Performance Anxiety in the Classroom because Stephen Fetchit has left the building. It was a great title, but my content was kind of tame. And Gabriella came back to me and she said, Mary, there are other editors on the team. It's a beautiful piece, but it's not rigorous enough. It doesn't have that musculature. And she said, you need to tell some stories. And I said, oh, I don't tell those stories. It's not Victorian to do that. And Gabriella said, no, you have to.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't have any. And she said, yeah, you do. Go home and think about it. And I don't know what happened, other than I went home and all of a sudden, like the memories came back. And it is in her book, but it's because you forced me to give voice to memories that I didn't want.
You force yourself.
Well, I wanted to be in that
Yes.
book.
Of course,
Because
but
that
your
book-
stories, your piece was so beautifully written, it just needed a little bit of chile.
But you were just,
wonderful.
and that's what it
Thank
takes,
you.
that kind of solidarity coaching
Absolutely.
amongst ourselves to say, I'm here for you.
We
So
only
you
learn
need
from,
to do
yeah.
this in
we only
order
learn
to break
from
through.
people we respect. I have learned so much from you as well.
And it hurts our feelings, but it's in a good way, right? It's in a positive way.
And so many people would not, I have other colleagues that didn't want to acknowledge their privilege. And I could not select their pieces or support them. I had to fight, we all had to fight for what pieces we wanted in there, but they did not, people don't want to acknowledge their privilege. They want to say that everybody wants to be a victim, right? And we need to talk about that. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. And I know that I was telling someone that for my students who are here, I know that someday you will remember this morning's breakfast. That was so beautiful, and today as well, because there was such deep sharing from everybody. And I know that that'll mark you. And so sincere and open. And when I introduced you this morning, I told everybody that you are sacred to me. And that is how I feel. Thank you for sharing this time with us. And please, we're ending a little bit early so
I can sign
that,
books for folks?
yes.